You know the feeling when you have planned a filming schedule, then you were told by the doctor that you need a little surgery, so you felt like now and you really tried to get the work done, but you just couldn't lift a finger. Yeah, that's basically what I'm feeling now. Hello, welcome back to my channel. You can sort of tell that I look like today. And yes, I do feel like today because I was sick. But today is the only free time in the next 5 or 7 days that I can film. So we're going to stick to the plan like every INTJ person does. Being sick has its advantages, such as you can spend a whole day in bed, drinking tea, reading books, and rewatching Suits for the 8th or 9th time.
Life is this. I like this.
So today we will be talking about two books that I have finished in 2025. Today's January the 5th. Happy birthday to my best friend. Technically, I finished the thicker one in the last night of 2024, but I think it still counts because I finished the last pages after midnight. So call me a cheater, but a win is a win. So the first one, we're gonna start with the thicker one. Living to Tell by Gabriel Márquez. It's an autobiography. It's huge, about 500 pages. It tells almost his whole life from being born to going to college, being a journalist, and becoming a writer. I once heard a gossip story about the prestigious classical music conductor Carl Jung. He went to see a concert, I think it was in New York, but he left during halftime break not because the performance were bad, because he thought the music playing during the first half was once in a lifetime performance, that he was willing to give up the second half and go home, just so the first half, the memory of the first half, will be saved permanently in his mind. I think it was a piece written by Schubert. Why did I mention Carl Jung leaving during halftime? Because I felt exactly the same about this book as he did about the performance, that I'm willing to put down any other books that I was reading or about to read, just so I can sink in this book for a little bit longer. That's how great the book is. As for the reason I love this book, first is in rich and color. He wrote in details like all his work. He wrote about the view, the color, the story of his childhood, his family, his 10 other siblings, how he went back home with his mom to sell the property, but ended up deciding that he really did want to be a novelist and started to write his first novel. His struggles with wanting to quit college and becoming a writer, or how his family stories was transformed into his own novel. I just finished Love in the Time of Cholera last year, and to read about how that book was loosely based on his parents' real story, it felt like a prequel of all his works. You will understand more about him and his writing. For example, he wrote a various of family stories that sound remarkably with the magical tone of his own novels. One of the oldest family members of his sewing her own clothes for her own funeral, and she died precisely after she arranged all the details of her own death, how his grandfather and his father had several illegitimate children and how it affected him and his family, or which plot in his earlier work was based on the true story of the family and the village he grew up in. Second, it's incredibly funny. Márquez wrote a lot of things that as a Nobel Prize winner, maybe he shouldn't. He wrote about how he frequently goes to the prostitutes, or he slept with multiple women, and one of their husband, who was a policeman, caught him and wanted to have a duel. Or he said in an honest, extremely honest manner that there were two things in his life that he cannot quit. One is cigarette, the other is women. It might sound a little bit outdated in today's world, right? You can't say that now. It was his genuine thoughts, and he wasn't trying to paint himself as someone who was morally perfect or a great person. He was very honest about his own advantages and disadvantages. He said he did a lot of things that he shouldn't, but all of that made him who he was. He also wrote about a particular dark time in Colombia's history, which he himself experienced as a journalist. Everything combined, it was a memoir that was absolutely well written. It was enjoyable to read for anyone who is a literature fan or even a history fan. I think maybe you will love it. It has humors, philosophical thinking, an honest review of one's life. I can't count how many times prostitute showed in the book. He wrote about a lot of things that he did when he was a kid that it was absolutely wrong. He regretted it. It was funny to read. The second book that I finished. Actually, I read it first in 2022, so about 2 years ago. I picked it up again because I read an article on Financial Times this week about how Gen Z readers are falling in love with this author and one of his shortest book, Dostoevsky, White Nights. I read it again in one afternoon in about 2 to 3 hours. It was pretty thin, about 100 pages, so you will have no trouble finishing it in one day. So the article on Financial Times, and there's a similar one on Fast Company, are stating that Gen Z readers think it's a masterpiece because it's complicated, delicate, it's deep, it's romantic, and it reflects on the loneliness life of the younger generation, where everyone lives in an isolated minor state, but are also eager for connections, to fall in love with other human beings. The story is about a young man who was walking and chatting with a young woman for 4 nights in a row on a bridge in Petersburg. Naturally, he fell in love with her, but he eventually had to watch her run back to her former lover. One day I saw a post on Instagram saying, "People today say I love you, but Dostoevsky said, your hand is cold, mine burns like fire, how blind you are." It made me laugh. It was a great post. Honestly, when I first read it 2 years ago, I wasn't particularly impressed, probably because I was in a relationship back then and it didn't click with me. But now after the second time I read it, I began to feel the deep pain that comparing to Dostoevsky's other works was not as obvious and sharp as in this book. For example, if you read Crime and Punishment, it was heavier, broader, and darker themes. But this one, I think the reason people love this work is because he used words like a scalpel to ask some very difficult questions about life. Why is life like this? Why is human being so complicated? What is love? Maybe comparing to Crime and Punishment, the pain of being human is less shown in White Nights because it was a lighter book, but you can see the tip of the iceberg already in this story, that people are forever chasing something we couldn't have, and we are eternally longing for connection and understanding. If you like White Nights, I think you will love Dostoevsky's other work, Netochika. I bought a pocket version, but I've lost it. I don't know where I put it. This story was written in the same year as White Nights, but it was left unfinished because the author being arrested and exiled. Think of it as a female and more complicated version of White Nights. The story was divided into 3 parts about Netochika's memory of her father, her adopted family, and her childhood. It was a cruel interpretation of women and how they were treated in their society. Netochika, who was longing eagerly for love and acceptance, was pushed into a swirl of different families. It was not as romantic as White Nights, because it broadened the topics of the novel from love to art, artists, and women. Even though it was not finished, the first part about how an artist self-sabotaged in alcohol, it was stunningly good. So that's all for today. I know it's a short video. We'll try harder in the coming weeks when all my body doesn't hurt at all. Next week, we are unboxing new books that I bought recently. The book I'm reading now, waiting for the medicine to kick in, is The Red and the Black, which I am about halfway, and I was left speechless multiple times by how tightly clicked the plots were and how fantastic yet disgusting the protagonist Julian was. We'll talk about it later. And the medicine started to kick in. I'm kind of dizzy now. See you next week.